this is an exciting day for me because Oliver Ngy and I have talked many times before, but I've never actually met him.
Lots of mutual friends in this industry.
Lots of mutual friends, work with a lot of the same people. What's exciting for me, you've caught a ton of big fish over the years. I mean, you can't deny that. He's caught a lot of big fish. That doesn't excite me. What excites me is that you like to fish for a bit of everything. Big bass.
Right.
But you like to fish for a bit of everything, and you enjoy the process of it. It's not all about the ego shot of the big fish. It's about how you catch them, where you catch them, who you catch them with. Context matters. Context matters.
And I actually opened up today's show with a seminar, not on big swim baits, not on glide baits, not on etc. We opened the show on pan fishing, because that was a huge fundamental phase of my fishing arc. I learned so much through pan fishing that I still apply now at the highest levels of the fishing that we do, whether it's trophy bass or muskies.
Like what? Give me an example of what.
Tuna Dreams.
Because so many guys say, you know, you're just a perch jerker or bluegill guy.
Right.
What can you learn from going out and catching bluegills or crappie that you can apply to other things?
So they offer a high frequency, high engagement opportunity to learn. Frankly, if you're doing it fairly efficiently, you should be able to generate lots of bites. Every one of those bites is an opportunity to learn something. Whether it's actually learning how to detect a bite, I mean, anybody can feel a bite when it's thump, thump, right? But can somebody pick up a bite and detect one when it's subtle? When something's eaten an 8-inch swim bait off the bottom, but there was no telltale thump or jig bite, and now your line's swimming upwind or up current. You have so many opportunities to be observant and understand fish behavior at that very fundamental level that you can then apply when the stakes are higher. You're getting much less frequent opportunities. If you get one bite a day on a 10-inch big bait, that's an incredible day. And if you mess that up, it quickly becomes a sour day. But if you utilize a fundamental level of fishing like pan fishing and make your mistakes there when the stakes aren't as high, you benefit immensely just as an overall angler. And you can just really perpetuate a way of thinking through pan fishing by being creative. And that's what we talked about this morning, is targeting panfish with different mindsets and actually reverse engineering things I've learned chasing giant bass and now flipping it and targeting giant panfish, because I've made a career out of targeting largemouth and smallmouth bass on a bait this big and just scaling down that mentality. Well, a big bait to a panfish is this big.
Right.
So now I'm selectively targeting the biggest individuals in a population of panfish with a big bait, even though it's only 3 inches long. It's actually a finesse swim bait. And I discovered that through bass fishing, incidentally, and actually utilize that to actually go target big panfish. So it works both ways.
So why do you think so many guys put themselves in a silo or a cage and they say, I am a bass fisherman, I am a trout fisherman?
Yeah, well, ego, number one, right?
Yeah.
It's way cooler to be an elitist fly fisherman and trout fisherman and this, that, and the third. I fish this expensive setup, I'm tying my own streamers, etc., etc. And in the bass fishing scene, you've seen it firsthand at these swim bait expos and gatherings. And as awesome as that is to see in person and that excitement and energy, I feel like the mistake too many people make is they want to circumvent a lot of the fundamental fishing styles, and thus are cheating themselves by trying to shortcut the process that I went through. And now they don't have enough basic fishing experience at a fundamental level through numbers of bites, numbers of missed opportunities, numbers of bad hook sets and bad knots and terrible fish fighting mechanics. And they skip straight to the top and they grind and they grind. And you know, we have such incredible tools in the swim bait genre now in 2024 that a lot of times the baits are so good, all you gotta do is chuck and wind. If you do it long enough, you're just gonna luck into a bite. The problem you guys might have is being able to duplicate that success.
I also feel like you get false positives. You catch a fish when you're not supposed to,
Right.
and then you say, well, this is the way to do it, and you stick with it, and you don't take that next step of learning what's the actual right way to do things, or a more productive way to do it.
Correct. And even the pan fishing taught me to ask the right questions, right? Not the where are you fishing, what are you using, but the whys.
So what are the key whys to that?
Why are you fishing there? Not because it's the hot spot, but because that spot sets up this way that is conducive to that lure that I picked and applying it in that scenario. That lure by itself, or that spot by itself, isn't worth a damn. Like, it's not worth anything if you don't know how to piece the entire puzzle together. And we've seen it time and time again with all these hyped big swim baits. People think, oh man, that's the missing puzzle in my piece, or missing piece of my puzzle.
Well, everyone
right?
thinks that. If I find magic lure syndrome,
Magic lure.
you think I get the $300 swim bait, all I need to do is tie it on and throw it.
It's pervasive in the big bait culture. No matter what the hype bait is, whether it's a Hinkle, shad, trout, depths 250, Defiant 210, whatever it is that people are excited about, KGBs, right, Pizza stuff, there's a lot of excitement behind it. But now there's enough people that have gotten their hands on the magic bait. You don't see a correlating frenzy of content or photos or fish catches that match up with the numbers.
You might see less because they decide to stick with something because they spent a lot of money or
Correct.
Good.
Or now that once niche bait has become somewhat like underground popular, and those fish are seeing it just enough to become conditioned now. Now it's having the opposite effect. So I really implore people, especially the clients that come on my boat to book a training session, like I like to bring them back to a fundamental level to give them opportunity to learn when the stakes are lower, especially if you have no experience fishing a jerkbait, but you want to become a glide bait fisherman. All right, how about we go out there and throw a jerkbait around so you can understand the basic underlying principles that scale up as your lure size gets bigger, but the concepts, the mechanics, and the lessons are the same.
So let me ask you this, transitioning here. Knowing I was going to meet you this week, I went to Big Bass Dreams, and I saw you have something that reflects one of my greatest passions, Big Tuna Dreams. Which came first for you, tuna or bass, or was it sort of simultaneous?
So I started freshwater fishing first. Are you okay? Right. We can pause and pick up. She wants to go to the Amazon. I don't blame her.
So where did it transition from bass to tuna or tuna to bass, or were they simultaneous?
Yeah, so being in Southern California, I grew up freshwater fishing at a little lake called Pudding Stone, but I was also about 15 minutes away from the coast. So I started saltwater fishing inside the bays, Newport Harbor, for spotted bay bass, sand bass, calico bass. And this is in the mid-90s. There's albacore fishing, maybe a little bit of bluefin, yellowfin on El Nino years. I remember 98 was a big El Nino year. Dorado on a half-day trip right outside of Long Beach, San Pedro. Crazy, right? But not really this bluefin fishery that exists now on our coast. And in the 2000s, as I became a young adult, and in my teen years, we went albacore fishing on the charter boats from San Diego to Channel Islands. And occasionally somebody would catch a bluefin. But albacore, especially in our region, were small. They're like 10 to 20 pounds. The big one's like 25, 30. Like, oh man, that's a nice albie. And then occasionally you'd be fishing that 15 or 20 pound and a bluefin would eat it. And if you were able to land a 50 to 80 pound stray bluefin in those albacore schools, like you did something crazy. Right? And there was also big eye back then. Guys would troll a big marlin feather on the way and catch these 250 pound big eye randomly. But about 2014-15, we started seeing an influx of big bluefin schools. The albacore disappeared. I haven't seen albacore in 15 years.
Oh, wow.
So the dynamics of our fisheries have changed. And the first year they were like 30 to 50 pounds. And then every year they got like 30 to 50 pounds bigger. So here we are 9 years later, and now you've got schools of 50 to 80 pounders and schools of 150 to 300 pounders. And I believe the state record was beat recently in the last couple seasons. I think just at the 400 pound mark.
Oh, wow.
So they're not Atlantic bluefin big. But for us, I mean, going from a 10 to 20 pound albacore to now having to deal with a 200-pound fish on any given cast has become a real thing. And even back then, you were traveling 60 to 120 miles offshore to be at the tuna grounds. The closest I caught a bluefin on a topwater stickbait this year was 3 miles outside of Dana Point Harbor.
Really?
So I've been driving thousands of miles across the country from LA to go do all this awesome fishing throughout the country, driving away from foaming bluefin tuna, 3 to 60 miles on average off our coast. So this past fall, when we got home from Lake Champlain, I've been chasing bluefin foamers up until November 12th was the last day we found them. And it finally kind of just got cold enough, or I think more importantly, the bait moved on and the fish went with it. So I've been able to focus a little bit more on the big calico dreams, big sheephead dreams, big whitefish on artificial dreams, and re-exploring my Southern California coast and backyard in a different way than I experienced it, as most anglers in Southern California have experienced it, either through the charter boat fishing or private boat fishing, but exploring new techniques, new tackle, and just new ideas. And have been having an absolute blast doing it.
Well, what really intrigued me is you talking about poppers and stick baits. I like to catch a big tuna any way I can, but there's a difference between catching them on bait or trolling in some way versus actually casting for them. Is that mostly what you're doing, casting for them?
Absolutely. In every type of fishing, in every species, there's levels to it, right? And generally, if you haven't caught a fish, you just want to catch one.
Right.
Live bait is your best bet, by far. Our sport fishing culture is very unique. Have you spent any time in Southern California fishing saltwater?
Not saltwater. The first place I was ever in a bass boat was Lake Castaic in 1993.
Damn, that's a heyday.
Yeah, with Gary Harrison was his name. And
I remember
was
him
out there that day and all of that. So that was my first experience with serious bass fishing. It's led to a career, but I haven't saltwater fished out there.
Okay, so we have a very unique saltwater culture. When we go to Florida or Virginia and watch our friends having to cast net their own bait and waste time, right? Like, it takes time sometimes to find bait and catch it.
Absolutely.
It's like, what the heck? In California, you can actually motor to every harbor to a bait barge. We've got these floating pens with thousands and thousands of anchovies, sardines, sometimes greenback Pacific mackerel, and squid. It's a very live bait oriented culture. So we have excess bait. Our sport fishing boats have giant bait tanks, and it's a chumming deal, right? 100-foot sport fisher has a harder time being agile and getting in tight to the beach and moving a lot. They've got to reset the anchor. The typical strategy is either drift or anchor in a high percentage spot. Chum, 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 draw the fish out to the boat. Now the boat is a piece of cover. So I grew up doing that like everybody else, fishing with gear that was way too heavy, very West Coast style gear, right? 9-foot jig stick so we can throw a surface iron metal jig as far from that boat to cover as much water at a hopeful yellowtail or white sea bass or Pacific barracuda. Or some kind of live bait rig. We do a thing called fly lining, where you just, it's an art form. It's actually not as easy as it sounds just to pin a live sardine on, especially when there's 30 other people doing it. Everybody's got to be in touch with their bait, feed the line, take line, let it swim, understand like a very intricate literal weave of fishing lines in a party boat. So I've been able to go out there and just try new ideas, including throwing stick baits that I've been catching largemouth and smallmouth across the country on in Connecticut, in New York, in Wisconsin, in Virginia, in Texas. Now I'm throwing that same bait in a different color scheme that looks kind of like an anchovy, but it's actually a top smelt. It's an inshore species. It's kind of like a grunion, jack smelt, that same family, but they're like a light green to turquoise backs with like silver bellies. And it turns out to work extremely well on finicky bluefin tuna. So if any of you guys have seen the viral clips of us casting stick baits into these foamers, what you're seeing is the highlight. You might not have seen the 5 other foaming pods that we rolled up to and tried everything. and never got a bite. It's the most maddening experience ever.
I don't know about you, but when we've done that on the yellowfin side of things, and you chase them, and then they go down, and you chase them again, it's the most mentally exhausting thing I've ever done. I find myself at the end of the day wiped out, even if I've had a fantastic, exciting day.
Oh, absolutely, because there's periods of inactivity as you're driving around for miles and miles looking for it, and then you finally find it. So your excitement and adrenaline is at an all-time peak, right? And being able to focus mentally to have the right mechanics to present that bait. And with the bluefin, they're very boat shy, so they often sink out. You usually get one good shot. So if you muck that up and backlash, right? The West Coast is very bait cast dominant culture. Spinning rods and reels were synonymous with inexperience. The rental fleet. If you're fishing a spinning rod and a coffee grinder, you probably don't know what you're doing. So, the West Coast is very heavy on shit talking and just this ego and machismo and things that wouldn't fly in 2024, right? A lot of words and terms got flown around the decks of sport fishing boats when I was coming up. And frankly, we feel like the young kids are kind of soft now, right? They've got level lines on their jig sticks, and the technology has come so far and it's made it so much easier. Like the skill level isn't as necessary to be successful now. But we're learning from other fishing cultures and looking at the Northeast, and they're popping for big bluefin, twice the size of our bluefin. Now we got 200-300 pound bluefin, but these guys are using 10,000, 20,000 size spinning reels to target 700 pound bluefin. So these guys are doing it efficiently, but it's been foreign to us. So I've been experimenting using that kind of gear in our backyard and finding that when I'm having to throw a 20-gram stick bait, I'm a pretty good caster. You put that on a 9-foot jig stick and a 40 size lever drag, I can only cast it maybe on a good cast, like halfway to that wall. Because now you got to fish the right gear.
Right.
80 to 100 pound braid, 130 pound shock leader. To be able to have 30 to 35 pounds of drag to land a 200 pounder. Anybody can cast a 400 size bass reel to get the bait there and get bit. You got almost no chance at landing one now, right? So why don't I go to the spinning gear where I can actually efficiently now cast that bait to the wall, into the meat of that foam. Now I've got a high percentage chance of presenting that lure before that school spooks and sinks out, instead of dealing with a backlash or cutting it short and not hitting that sweet spot in the foam. And that's been a learning curve for us, because that's not what we know, because the idea is to become experienced enough with it to take clients now that are even less skilled and experienced.
It's not just Big Tuna Dreams gear, it's Big Tuna Trip guiding?
Correct. So Captain Riley Kolich and I are going to be expanding on our training sessions that we do on the freshwater side, and expanding it into this saltwater world that we've known and experienced in a whole new way. So I want to be different, just like I was on the freshwater scene. People thought my pricing was insane at the time, but really, who could give insight into the experience of the big bait world with the experience and the gear and the unique experience that I was providing. And we want to do the same thing on the saltwater side. If you want to just go catch a bluefin, there's a plethora of amazing charter boats up and down our coast. And I think that's a very important part of our culture. But a charter boat is a very difficult place, being 30 to 35 people, to learn how to catch them in a specific way. And in this case, casting an artificial right through a pot of foaming tuna. It's run and gun style fishing. It's dominated by skiffs and private boats. The charter boats don't have the mobility to do that. okay? And it's more challenging to fool one and land one on a hunk of wood or plastic than it is a live bait. So there's levels to it. Like if you haven't caught a bluefin yet, you might want to come out and just fish a live bait. We can teach you how to do that too. But then, you know, as you continue to notch things off your checklist, continue to challenge yourself, okay, you want to learn how to cast a stick bait at these things? All right, this is the place to be. Because I'm going to walk you through the mechanics. We're going to make some practice casts before we're in that moment so that you have the highest probability of having that success yourself. There are other operations that fish that way, but they have too much FOMO.
Right.
Our culture is dominated by fish counts, generating people booking trips. So if a boat in a charter operation doesn't show that they caught limits that day, they're afraid that they're not going to generate continued business.
So what's your definition of success? Someone comes for the first time with you, they've never caught a tuna of any kind, let alone a bluefin. What's a successful day?
If that angler comes away and learns something and is happy with that experience, whether or not we busted their ass or not. Because now, even if the fishing was tough, and in worst case, we didn't get an opportunity, but they actually got first-hand experience that they can take with them and build upon on their own. Right? I'm going to give you a fundamental base layer. You can build off that fundamental and explore from there. You got a great start. You can shorten that learning curve. That's very steep. But frankly, I tend to attract the right clientele that are okay understanding this is high risk, high reward style of fishing at that level. And because they're open-minded and they're a sponge and they have no preconceived notions, and frankly, a lot of people haven't done this.
Right.
So it's a blank slate. So, I mean, you guys are easy. I tell you to do this, you do it.
And I've gotten to the point in my fishing career where obviously I don't want to fail, but if I fail, I feel like that's the next step towards succeeding long term.
Absolutely.
So I'm buying completely into your mindset there.
I'm putting that rod and reel in your hands, that stick bait in your hands, allowing your mind to manipulate that bait, and allowing you to experience that giant bluefin, destroying it and coming tight.
So, two questions, I guess, that are semi-related. What's the best time of year to do this, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to book one of these awesome trips?
No, absolutely. So we have a year-round fishery in Southern California, freshwater and saltwater. If you want to come calico bass fishing, that's year-round. If you want to come spotted bait bass fishing in the harbors, that's year-round. If you want to fish rockfish, it's open usually around April. And then that's open in certain depths until like September, and then it shuts down again first of the year. If you want to come fish for an awesome fish called the California sheephead, you can catch them and release them year round. You can catch and retain them because they're delicious from March 1st until December 31st. Now if you want to come offshore fishing, we get bluefin tuna showing up as early as April some years, but you can count on July through September being hot and heavy. November 12th was the last day we were throwing stick baits at them. And they finally, that's a long season, okay? And you can reach out to me directly, Oliver at bigbassstreams.com, or you can reach out through Half Past First Cast.
I'm so glad you stopped by. I finally got to meet you. I got to pick your brain on my tuna addiction.
Yeah.
And remember everyone, Big Tuna Dreams, catch fish, not feelings. Look up Oliver Ngy, he's the real deal.
Appreciate you guys. Looking forward to hanging out with some of you.